Every year you spend money on seeds. You spend money on starts. You spend money at the grocery store on food that gets more expensive every single month. And every year, you start over from scratch. Annual crops are work. Every spring you plant. Every fall you harvest. Every year, the cycle resets. But here is the question most gardeners never ask themselves. What if the most productive food system you could build requires almost no work at all once it's in the ground? Trees are different. You plant a tree once, you wait, and then it feeds you for decades, sometimes for generations. And here is the part that changes the math completely. No single tree lives 300 years, but a food system built from the right trees, passed down and replanted across generations, will feed your family for 300 years without ever buying a seed again. There are 7 trees that will produce more food over their lifetime than you could grow in annual gardens of equivalent space. Number 3 on this list produces 200 to 400 pounds of food per year, stores for over a year without refrigeration, and was the primary survival food that kept mountain communities alive through every major famine in European history. Number 1 can feed a family of 4 from a single tree, and was the primary food source for entire civilizations for thousands of years. These are not ornamental trees. These are food production systems that your grandchildren will harvest from. Every year you delay planting is a year of production permanently lost. The best time to plant them was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. Before we go further, drop your USDA zone in the comments right now, because 3 of these 7 trees have hard zone limits that most gardening videos never mention. And I do not want you to spend years growing something that will never survive your winter. Zone 4, Zone 7, Zone 9, wherever you are, put it below. I read every single one. Starting at number 7, hazelnut trees. Americans pay $8 to $10 for a bag of hazelnuts at the store. Every year, a mature hazelnut tree produces 20 to 30 pounds of nuts annually. 56,000 to 84,000 calories from a single tree. Shelf stable for over a year without refrigeration. That bag at the store costs you every time. The tree costs you once. But here is what most people who plant hazelnuts never figure out until it is too late. Most of them never harvest a single nut. Not because the tree failed, because nobody told them 2 things. First, hazelnut trees need cross-pollination from a different named variety. Not just any 2 hazelnut trees. Specifically compatible varieties. Plant the wrong combination, and you get 0 production no matter how healthy the trees look. Second, squirrels will harvest a significant portion before you do. That is not a problem to solve. It is a reality to plan for. Plant more than you think you need. Choose at least 2 different named varieties suited to your climate. Water during establishment. In 3 to 4 years, you will start harvesting. In 40 years, you will still be harvesting. During grain failures across Europe, hazelnut trees on the edges of fields kept communities alive through winter. When the crops were gone, the hazelnuts were still there, calorie-dense, storable, and requiring nothing from the people who depended on them. You planted 2 trees. You waited 4 years. Now you have shelf-stable, calorie-dense food that costs nothing and stores itself. That is a return no grocery store can match. Number 6, fig trees. Fresh figs at the store cost $4 to $6 for a small container and disappear from shelves within days. A mature fig tree produces 100 to 200 pounds of fruit per year. You cannot eat it all. You will be giving it away, drying it, and storing food that costs you nothing to produce. Most people in Zones 6 and 7 assume figs will not survive their winters. This is the assumption that keeps them paying store prices when they do not have to. Chicago hardy figs survive Zone 6 winters if you mulch the roots heavily before the cold arrives. Even if the top of the tree dies back, the roots push new growth that fruits the same year. Plant in a sunny location with decent drainage. Water moderately during establishment. Harvest when the fruit is soft and fully colored. Here is the part that multiplies your investment. Fig trees propagate easily from cuttings. 1 tree becomes 2 trees. 2 trees become 4. You start with 1 tree, and in 10 years, your entire street can have food security from cuttings you gave away for free. Dried figs store for over a year and provide 1,200 calories per pound. During sieges and famines throughout Mediterranean history, fig trees often meant the difference between survival and starvation. The trees kept producing when grain stores were gone and trade routes were cut off. People with fig trees had food. People without them did not. You are not just planting a fruit tree. You are planting a propagation system. Number 5. Mulberry trees. Mulberries will never appear at your grocery store. Not because they do not exist, because the fruit is too delicate to survive shipping. It bruises if you look at it wrong. Every mulberry you eat is one you grew yourself, or you do not eat it at all. No amount of money fixes that. Only a tree in your yard does. Mulberry trees are absurdly productive. A mature tree produces 50 to 80 pounds of fruit per year. The fruit ripens over several weeks, which means you are not overwhelmed with everything at once. You pick it and eat it. No processing required. Plant in a spot where falling fruit will not stain your driveway or walkways. Choose white, red, or black variety, depending on your climate. Water for the first year, until established. Then ignore it completely for the next 50 years. When dried, mulberries contain approximately 10% protein, exceptional for any fruit. The leaves are nutritious enough to feed silkworms. That tells you exactly how much food value is packed into this tree. A lot of people who grew up near a mulberry tree remember picking them as kids, coming home with purple-stained fingers and not caring at all. That tree was producing for decades before they were born, and it kept producing long after they moved away. In parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan, dried mulberries are still a winter staple stored for months. A food source so reliable that entire communities have depended on it for generations. After planting one tree, you will never need to buy mulberries, because you will never find them for sale anywhere anyway. Number 4. Apple trees. Apples are so common that most people underestimate what they actually represent as a food system. A productive apple tree yields 200 to 400 pounds of fruit per year once mature. That is a massive amount of food from a single tree. But the real value is not the fruit. It is what you can do with the fruit. Apples stored in cool conditions last 3 to 6 months fresh. Dried apples last over a year. Fermented into cider, they store indefinitely. Before modern grocery stores existed, apples were one of the only foods that carried nutrition through the entire winter. Early American homesteaders planted apple orchards on every property, because when the grain crops failed, apples provided the carbohydrates and vitamin C that kept families alive through winter. The trees kept producing regardless. Plant at least 2 different varieties for cross-pollination. Choose disease-resistant varieties suited to your climate. Be prepared to manage pests. Apples attract more insects than most other trees on this list. But the productivity justifies it. A family with 4 mature apple trees has 800 pounds of apples annually. Enough to eat fresh, dry for storage, make cider, and trade the surplus. This is not just fruit. This is a food preservation system that kept American families alive through every hard winter before the grocery store existed. If these first 4 trees just showed you that food security is something you can actually build, not buy, hit that subscribe button right now. Every week on this channel, we share strategies for growing real food, building systems that outlast inflation, and creating something that feeds your family long after grocery store prices stop making sense. It is free, and it is exactly the kind of thinking that separates people who are prepared from people who are not. Number 3. Chestnut trees. Chestnuts at specialty stores cost $5 to $8 per pound and appear on shelves for only a few weeks each year. A mature chestnut tree produces 200 to 400 pounds per year. At 200 calories per 100 grams more calorically dense than potatoes, this is not a snack. This is a staple food. What most Americans do not know is that chestnuts were once the most important food tree in temperate climates. The American chestnut blight of the early 1900s nearly wiped out the species across North America. Most Americans alive today have never seen a chestnut tree in the wild and have no idea what they lost. Blight-resistant varieties exist now. Chinese and European chestnuts are available and proven. Plant in well-drained soil. Protect from deer during establishment. The burr shells are extremely sharp. Plan accordingly. If children or bare feet will be anywhere near the tree. In 5 to 7 years, modest production begins. In 20 to 30 years, production becomes massive. In mountain communities across Europe, chestnut forests kept entire populations alive during every major famine for centuries. When lowland grain crops failed, the trees on the slopes kept producing year after year with zero maintenance. You are not planting for yourself. You are planting for your children and grandchildren. Number 2. Walnut trees. Walnuts cost $8 to $12 per pound at the store, and that price climbs every year. A mature walnut tree produces 50 to 80 pounds of nuts annually, 150,000 to 240,000 calories from one tree, high in omega-3 fatty acids, protein, and healthy fats. During food shortages, fats are the hardest nutrients to find. Walnut trees solve that problem. But here is what most videos about walnut trees will not tell you. A mature walnut in a small yard will eventually shade out most of what is growing around it, and the juglone it produces will limit what you can plant nearby. Plan the location carefully before you put it in the ground. Plant it where the shade and root competition will not be a problem, not wherever happens to be convenient right now. Choose English walnuts for larger, thinner-shelled nuts that are easier to crack. Choose black walnuts if cold hardiness matters more. Water during establishment. Protect from deer and squirrels early on. During the Great Depression, families with walnut trees had food to eat and surplus to sell. During World War II, walnut trees provided critical fats when meat and butter were rationed. The trees required nothing. They just produced. When you plant a walnut today, you are not just feeding yourself in 10 years. You are leaving a biological bank account that pays food dividends for 150 years and cashes out in timber for your grandchildren. And finally, taking the number 1 spot, oak trees. Oak trees fed entire civilizations. A mature oak can produce 500 to 1,000 pounds of acorns per year, at approximately 2,000 calories per pound. That is not a typo. Hundreds of pounds of food annually from a single tree. For 300 years or more, most people assume acorns are not edible. That assumption comes from not knowing which oaks to plant. White oak varieties, Quercus alba, Oregon white oak, sawtooth oak, produce sweet acorns with low tannin content that require minimal or no processing. Plant these specifically. Indigenous California tribes managed oak groves as deliberate food production systems for thousands of years. They cleared undergrowth, protected trees, and harvested acorns as the foundation of their diet, not a supplement. The foundation. During the Korean War, acorns were a significant food source when other supplies were unavailable. During famines across Europe and Asia, acorns kept communities alive when everything else was gone. Plant in full sun with good drainage. Protect from deer during establishment. Then step back and let the tree grow for decades. In 20 years, it starts producing. In 50 years, it produces hundreds of pounds per year. In 200 years, it is still producing. Your great-great-grandchildren will be collecting acorns from a tree you planted today. And here's the truth that ties all 7 trees together. No single tree on this list lives 300 years on its own. But a food system built from all 7, replanted, passed down, and expanded across generations, will feed your family for 300 years without ever buying a seed again. Annual crops are farming. Trees are legacy. When you plant a walnut today, you are feeding your children in 30 years. When you plant an oak today, you are feeding your great-grandchildren in 60 years. The families that survived famines, depressions, and wars were the ones with orchards and nut groves planted by their grandparents. You can be that ancestor, or you can keep planting annual crops and hoping next year's harvest is enough. The choice is yours. But the best time to choose was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. Hazelnut, fig, mulberry, apple, chestnut, walnut, oak, 7 trees, 1 planting, a food system that outlasts everything else you will ever build. If this just changed how you think about food security, not for this year, but for the next 100 years, hit like and subscribe. Every week, We share strategies for building food systems that outlast grocery store prices, inflation, and anything else that tries to get between your family and real food. And drop a comment. Which of these 7 trees are you planting first? Tell me your zone. I want to make sure it actually works where you live. I read every single one.